So full disclosure, I may have played through the Souls games in the most convoluted order possible. My first Dark Souls game was 3, followed by 1 remastered, and then finally cap-ended by Scholar of the First Sin. What does this mean? Well, for starters, I hopped on the bandwagon late like a fake fan, but it's also given me some interesting insight on the series as a whole. See, Dark Souls is really weird about time. Any way you cut it, Dark Souls is a series grossly obsessed with the passage of time, and its exploration of this concept is hardly playful. This isn't Majora's Mask or Chrono Trigger. While the franchise is always presented as an action RPG, horror is an intrinsic part of these games. Making the player feel small and powerless amidst a frighteningly powerful world has always been a core component of the gameplay loop, lending credence to the idea that Dark Souls is part horror game and setting it firmly within the dark fantasy genre. Undead and demons aside, Dark Souls posits that time is one of the most horrifying things of all. It's the thematic centerpiece of the series, the T-virus to Resident Evil, the Silent Hill to Silent Hill. Concepts like eternity, legacy, and finality are embedded in the very DNA of these titles, but what's more, I think each individual entry in the series embodies one of these concepts flawlessly. To paint a clear picture of what I mean, we need to go back, far before the embers, thrones, or souls. We need to start at the beginning.
In the age of ancients, the world was unformed, shrouded by fog. A land of grey crags, arch trees, and everlasting dragons. But then there was fire, and with fire came disparity. Heat and cold, life and death, and of course, light and dark.
The moment you start Dark Souls, you're treated to a lore dump about the world and its history. Not much of this is of any value to the player, it mostly serves to establish the bosses you'll be facing later on, but there are 2 very important facts that are often glossed over. The first is the Age of Ancients. Way back when, the world was immutable, perfectly preserved in all of its grey cragginess. This was a land of immortal dragons and gargantuan world trees, and for all we know, they could have lived for eons before the start of the game. They existed in a static, unchanging world where there's only one uniform state of being. The Age of Ancients was undoubtedly an eternal world. But then along came Gwyn. The second important fact that we learned at the very start of the game is that things changed. With the advent of fire came a worldwide transmutation, the laws of nature being rewritten entirely. The everlasting dragons were killed, the fog was lifted, and the world was claimed by new gods. Gwyn, the Zeus or Odin of this new pantheon, used the powerful soul he'd acquired to help shape the world to his liking. He made a brilliant city called Anorlando, he shared his power with others to create even more gods, and he raised an army of powerful knights to keep the world safe. The most important of his creations, however, was the sun, a shining beacon of warmth, yes, but also a representation of Lordran's newest concept, time. Much like the world's new universal disparity, the advent of time meant that things were constantly changing in Lordran, shifting between different states of being. New life would grow and populate the world, with plants far more diverse than any arch tree. In these new biomes, creatures of all shapes and sizes would begin to appear, each more wildly different than the everlasting dragons that came before. Over all of this rested the sun, rising and setting as the days pass, displaying the new, dynamic state of Lordran. Because for every bit of new life brought into the world, there would also be death. For every bright, sunny day, there would be a dark and cold night. And for every bit of good that fire brought to the world, there would undoubtedly be some measure of evil. The titular Dark Soul doesn't get talked about a whole lot, at least not directly, but it's a little piece of what remained of the First Flame after all the other lords had taken their share. It was claimed by the furtive pygmy, and from that power, humanity was born. They didn't have earth-shattering, god-like power akin to Gwyn, but they had an almost infinite potential to grow. So human settlements would crop up all across Lordran, carving away their own little slices of paradise. And all the while, Gwyn would remain cautious of humanity's growth, not because of any pervasive evil among them, but because they had the potential to change things. They could end Gwyn's perfect world. But time, like all things, marches forward. Gwyn's fears were focused in the wrong place. Humanity didn't need to do anything to stop the Age of Fire. The Age of Fire was always just meant to end. It's tough to say how long things lasted in this prosperous state, but eventually the fire began to fade, and the powers that be began scrambling to find some kind of solution. But everything they tried only made things immeasurably worse, so Gwyn chose to sacrifice himself to keep the first flame lit. He would succeed in fighting the flow of time, kindling this ancient flame for just a little while longer, but the world would also face terrible consequences. The most notable of these consequences was the undead. Gwyn's desperate attempt to keep time from marching onward would, in turn, result in humanity being unable to truly die. Those that perished, regardless of the cause, would be brought back at a bonfire, where they could continue on with their life, unhindered. In a manner of speaking, the undead are immortal beings, unable to die in the traditional sense. But this system isn't perfect. The immortality provided to the undead is flawed. Those unable to bear the weight of death and despair can break, just in mind as opposed to body. When an undead spirit is sufficiently crushed, be it from death, loss, or any number of soul-crushing circumstances, they return as hollow shells of their former selves. Those who have hollowed are still immortal, but they've lost their original essence, just like the world itself. Rekindling the first flame managed to restore the Age of Fire, but in doing so, Gwyn perverted a concept he himself created. Time is not meant to be defied. The very act of extending the Age of Fire and manufacturing eternity doomed the human race. To live far beyond your years is to witness immeasurable suffering. What's more, Gwyn's sacrifice didn't preserve the Age of Fire, it only extended it. The fire still fades, and with no grand gods to link the flame, the task is passed on to the undead, or more specifically, to you. This is where the cyclical eternity really begins. The second you wake up in the Undead Asylum, you are entered into an inescapable loop, an eternal recurrence. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about the concept of eternal return, or eternal recurrence, describing it as the idea that all events in the world repeat themselves in the same sequence through an eternal series of cycles. There have been several in-depth explorations of this idea pervasive through his writing, such as in The Gay Science and Thus Spoke Zarathustra, but the most succinct explanation can be found in the Notes on Eternal Recurrence, where Nietzsche writes, "Fellow man, your whole life, like a sandglass, will always be reversed and will ever run out again. A long minute of time will elapse until all those conditions out of which you were evolved return in the wheel of the cosmic process. And then you will find every pain and every pleasure, every friend and every enemy, every hope and every error, every blade of grass and every ray of sunshine once more, and the whole fabric of things which make up your life. This ring, in which you are but a grain of glitter afresh forever. And in every one of these cycles of human life, there will be 1 hour where, for the first time, one man, and then many, will perceive the mighty thought of the eternal recurrence of all things. And for mankind, this is always the hour of noon. No matter which journey you take, which locations you visit, and which bosses you decide to kill, you will always begin at the Undead Asylum and end at the Kiln of the First Flame. No matter how many times you lose your life in battle, fall at the hands of an enemy, or feel gravity take its hold on you, you will always return at the bonfire. And no matter which ending you decide to get, whether you offer yourself as tribute to the First Flame, extending the Age of Fire for another cycle, or leave the fire to fade and let darkness overtake Lordran, you'll always end up back at the Asylum, right where you started. This is the unnatural world of Dark Souls, where time is disregarded and cycles dominate. You are locked into an eternal recurrence, but in every loop, a little bit is lost. The game becomes all too familiar to you until playing through it is effectively second nature. You can experiment with new builds, attempt game-breaking bugs, test your skills by playing without even getting hit, but eventually the spark of enjoyment will fade. Try as you might, you can't play Dark Souls forever. This being the case, a Dark Souls sequel was an inevitability, but how do you follow Dark Souls?
Long ago, in a walled-off land far to the north, a great king built a great kingdom. I believe they called it Dreg Lake. Perhaps you're familiar. No, how could you be? But one day, you will stand before its decrepit gate without really knowing why.
Dark Souls 2 takes place in the Kingdom of Dreg Lake, a whimsical fantasy land that couldn't be further removed from Lordran. Instead of epic tales of gods, monsters, and myths of creation, Dreg Lake is far more concerned about the here and now. While things are still larger than life, the focus of this narrative is on the exploits of men. Dark Souls 2 is a story about monarchy, and more specifically, the royal succession. But before we can discuss crowns and thrones, we must start with who you are. At the very beginning of the game, it is established that your character has been branded with the Dark Sign, a sigil that carries with it a powerful curse. You are undead, but you are also hollowing. As we discussed earlier, hollowing is a process that ends with the individual completely losing their mind, but previously this was limited to the NPCs of the world. This time around, you're the one going mad. The opening cinematic of the game illustrates this wonderfully, showing faces of your past literally melting away as you forget who they are, and your character falling into a swirling vortex of darkness consumed by this curse. All this to say, you were someone once upon a time, but now you've lost all of that and have to move on. So you wander into Dreg Lake and follow any lead you get in order to remove your curse, fighting massive beasts and wretched knights, all in the hopes of reaching the king. Along the way, you also learn about the man himself, how King Vendrick helped save Dreg Lake from giant invaders, and all the other great deeds he did during his time as ruler. From the way the narrative has positioned Vendrick, it's very easy to get Gwyn vibes from this dude. It's entirely likely that the great king of Dreg Lake will be your final foe. So after collecting 4 powerful souls throughout the game's world, you arrive at the gates of Dreg Lake Castle, but the king is absent. The only royalty here is the queen, Nishandra, and she's quick to inform you that the king isn't the great man he's been made out to be. With him absent, someone else needs to take the throne, and she seems keen on that someone being you. All you need to do is find the king, and his title can be yours. So you press on, moving further underground until you arrive at the Undead Crypt, a dark, damp hole in the ground filled to the brim with royal guards, desperate to keep you from what is waiting at the very end. Even the Royal Aegis is willing to lay down his life to protect this crypt, to protect the dark truth just ahead of you. With no more obstacles, you get to forge on ahead and finally see the great king you've heard so much about. And he's gone completely hollow. The encounter with Vendrick here is equal parts unsettling and captivating. He wanders around a dark room that could very well be a boss arena, dragging his greatsword behind him, but he's totally peaceful. In fact, so long as you don't attack him outright, Vendrick doesn't even notice you exist. His mind has melted away, and he's no different from you now. The legacy he's left behind, along with his title and dominion, has allowed Vendrick to gain renown that rivals even the gods, yet even he succumbs to the passing of time. Perhaps monarchy isn't all it's cracked up to be. Dark Souls 2 is also accompanied by 3 DLCs that each feature a different kingdom, one buried deep below the ground, one covered in soot and ash, and one completely frozen over. Each of them are dead kingdoms with absent rulers, and when you inevitably inherit each of their crowns, fighting tooth and nail against some of the most fearsome bosses in the game, you become the new king. It's never triumphant, and it's hardly even worth the trouble. All you've managed to inherit is a mound of dirt where something great once stood. Now these kingdoms are just bones, decaying remains that could not withstand the passage of time. So every victory and conquest, be it over dragons, knights, or corrupted kings, always ends up feeling empty. To rule is to have dominion over a land and a people, a power that can be seen as rivaling even a god's. While Dark Souls 2 asserts that there is power in ruling, it also very clearly criticizes the idea of a monarch. The kings of this world are all husks of men, and the queens are literally born from darkness. They've tried to create a system here that can fight against the curse of the undead, to succeed where Gwyn failed and truly manufacture immortality, but it's just as flawed a system as linking the first flame. By the end of your journey, after seeing every bit of concealed truth in Dreg Lake, you can take the throne and become its new ruler. But after the credits roll, you're put right back in the world as if nothing ever happened. Because at the end of the day, you're king now, but king of what? This idea of empty legacy and abandoning what came before is not entirely contained within the narrative too. I think that there's a case to be made about DS2's relationship with its predecessor. Dark Souls was a great game. Certainly not perfect, but it'll always hold a special place in my heart. How do you follow a game like Dark Souls? With a troubled development cycle, an absent Miyazaki, and 2 separate directors taking the helm through the game's production, it feels like Dark Souls 2 should have been doomed from the start. Yet it overcame those hurdles and managed to bring everything together with a nice, neat bow following the release of Scholar of the First Sin. It was missing a lot of the Miyazaki flair that people craved, like the intuitive and interconnected world from 1, but it traded that in for something more abstract, a world that feels as though it's being described by someone going truly mad. It starts slow with little inaccuracies in time and space, but quickly becomes incomprehensible, with elevators taking you up into skybound lava lakes. Dark Souls 2 does everything necessary to qualify itself as a Dark Souls game, but it isn't afraid to experiment with new ideas either. Life gems, losing health as you hollow, the inclusion of torches to exemplify the game's new lighting engine. All of these ideas mesh together in a way that makes the game feel unique when compared to the original. While it may not be perfect, I believe Dark Souls 2 has earned lordship in its own right. But like we learned in Dark Souls 1, the nature of this world is cyclical. All lords must be usurped at some point to make room for another. 2 years after the release of Dark Souls 2, we finally see the return of the Kingmaker with the release of Dark Souls 3.
Yes, indeed. It is called Lothric, where the transitory lands of the Lords of Cinder converge. In venturing north, the pilgrims discover the truth of the old words. The fire fades, and the lords go without thrones.
All things must, eventually, come to an end. In the grand cosmic mess of existence, that thought alone is the most terrifying. Because what will all of this have been for if the world is fated to crumble and die one day? When the sun explodes and our solar system is obliterated, then what? The world of Dark Souls has crept closer to the edge of apocalypse more times than it has any right to, yet somehow it's managed to bounce back. Within Dark Souls 3, countless cycles have occurred since Gwyn first gave himself up to the First Flame, so many that the world has lost track. But despite this fact, despite how many iterations of the world we've been through, the fire continues to fade. Time marches onward. Those who have linked the First Flame and burned up in the process are referred to now as unkindled, undead beings that have all but burned to ash. Each unkindled is another cycle that has gone by, their coffins literally displaying the cost of keeping the Age of Fire alive. Alongside the unkindled are a new breed of more powerful undead, those who successfully link the First Flame and survive, much like Gwyn himself. They are Lords of Cinder, and each of them carries a part of the First Flame inside of them. Now that such mighty warriors exist in the world, their linking of the First Flame is an expectation. The world has accepted eternal recurrence and assumes that more cycles will follow. But the prince of this kingdom, Lothric, refuses to link the flame. In similar fashion, the other Lords of Cinder ignore the fading fire. They have all, in one capacity or another, saved this world, kept it preserved in its current state of being, but things have only further deteriorated. Each of these indifferent undead powerhouses has seen what relinking the flame can accomplish, and knows that to forge on is a pointless endeavor. So the unkindled are revived, brought back in the hopes of serving one final purpose. They are ash, seeking embers, desperately trying to keep the fire alive. Try as they might to save this world, so much of it has already lost its luster. The most shining example of this is hidden away in Irithyll, protected by Pontiff Sullivan. The once radiant city of Anor Londo, pride of Gwyn, has become a shell of its former self. The great irony of all this is that even in Dark Souls 1, it was in a state of disarray. Gwyn's youngest child, Gwyndolin, had placed a powerful illusion over the city to make it appear as though everything were in working order. Anor Londo's iconic radiance may have been fake, but at the very least someone was trying to keep up appearances. All these years later, Gwendolyn is gone, slowly devoured and digested by Aldrich. So now the legendary city of the gods has no choice but to crumble and die. Another, more subtle sign of the world's decay comes from below, in the Smouldering Lake. Deep below the earth has always been where the demons of the Souls series reside, a race that was born from a failed attempt at recreating the first flame. They've been around since the beginning of it all, but now hell is practically empty. You can find the corpses of countless iconic demons from the first game lazily strewn about in piles all over the place. The only true survivor is the old Demon King, the last living witness of the chaos of Asylum, and he's easily dispatched. The gods and demons of this world have all but died out, leaving this fated world to be inherited by the undead, and yet every able-bodied individual continues to link the first flame, protecting an ideal world that no longer exists and was never even meant for them in the first place. Gwyn's greatest accomplishment, his final legacy in this world, is ultimately the grand con that the first flame must keep burning. Even the sun has managed to burn out before the first flame. The symbol of time has been willfully ignored for so long that it's just fading away. In a roundabout way, trying to keep the world alive and vibrant has only made it immeasurably worse, dooming it to a fate far worse than any unknown. But in order to truly understand the scope of this, we have to look towards the DLC. In Dark Souls 3's Ringed City DLC, you gain access to an optional area just beyond the Kiln of the First Flame, a place called the Dreg Heap. One of the pilgrims who rests here explains that,
"At the close of the Age of Fire, all lands meet at the end of the earth. Great kingdoms and anemic townships will be one and the same. The great tide of human enterprise, all for naught. That's why I'm so taken by this grand sight. This must be what it's like to be a god."
In similar fashion to core DS3, we can find a number of callbacks to areas in the earlier Souls games, Earthen Peak's ruins being the most notable. The arena you fight the twin demons in also bears significant resemblance to the classic Firelink Shrine, but in both cases, these areas have long since crumbled and decayed. But the focus I'd like to place here isn't on the Dreg Heap, it's what lies beyond this ruined wasteland, the titular Ringed City. Here, the Pygmies have been given their own secluded society, a small slice of heaven that they can call their own. Gwyn generously gifted the Pygmies the city in exchange for one simple favor: keep his daughter Filianor safe. So they locked her away in a tower for ages, letting her rest undisturbed. You make your way across the entire city, you finally reach her chambers, and you disturb her slumber. Then this happens. You get to witness the very end of this world, the final state of all things. The world hasn't burned away or succumbed to darkness. Rather, all things have become buried in ash. Millennia of linking the first flame, burning away the bodies of the undead and turning them into ash has led to this, a wasteland of dust. Of all the great civilizations that have come and gone, none of them have managed to stop the needless cycle of fire. Despite all the world's efforts to preserve things as they are, they cannot defy time. They cannot hold back this universal decay. So You wander the Desert of Ash with nothing but a dying pygmy lord and a slave knight to keep you company. And once they're both gone, you're all that remains. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. Perhaps the most distressing thing about all of this is that the game keeps going. This is not the end of your story, it's just the end of everything else. You have to go back to the world that came before, back to your grand mission to relink the First Flame, all while knowing that this is what the end looks like. There was never a clear picture of what laid ahead in the world of the Souls series. It was always assumed that these cycles would continue forever and mankind would simply adapt. But now you have to live with the knowledge that this world is finite. Everything as you know it will end. Time is cruel and unrelenting. It's a force that's greater than any god or king. Fighting the flow of time is a hopeless endeavor. All three of these games have made that point as clear as day. Trying to fight the natural order is equal parts negligent and destructive. So for all the fear that the unknown can bring, it's healthier to move forward as opposed to living so firmly in the past. While I think this lesson can be helpful in a lot of cases, it has a certain poignancy with regards to the Dark Souls series itself. Dark Souls means a lot of things to a lot of people, but I think it's most significant to Miyazaki, who was really put on the map by DS1. Since the game was released in 2011, he's played around with a bunch of other really interesting ideas, many of which have been extremely successful. If Miyazaki hadn't allowed himself to step away from Dark Souls, we wouldn't have games like Bloodborne or Sekiro. So, as terrifying as the unknown can be, desperately trying to preserve the iconic feel of Dark Souls is impossible. You can't keep churning out the same game in an endless cycle because eventually they'll end up feeling stagnant. The expectations set by the original's legacy are at times too big to live up to, meaning that there will always be criticism. And besides, coming out on top with a Dark Souls sequel only means the next one will have bigger shoes to fill. So, DS3 firmly marks the end of this series. A bleak final note for all of this to end on, true, but an inevitable one. Everything, at some point or another, must come to an end. Dark Souls is about fantasy, fire, and time, sure, but in a roundabout way, I think Dark Souls really is just about Dark Souls.